Guy that did have a career year, Jay, Baker Mayfield, career highs in passing yards, touchdowns, completion percentage, ends up staying in Tampa. He was
Friend of the show.
very
Friend of the
vocal
show,
to you
yes.
guys how important it was finding a place that he thrived in. And it's no surprise to see him stay after saying that.
Yeah. First of all, it's just good for Baker Mayfield
Yes.
that it seemed like he was on his way, honestly, to potentially being out of the league or a career backup. And then last year he plays at effectively a Pro Bowl level and secures his future. I think fantasy-wise, it's good for Mike Evans,
Yes.
certainly, who obviously is back in Tampa as well. Good for Chris Godwin, good for Rashad White that they have a quarterback who is, Baker Mayfield's not a superstar, but he is a very solid quarterback and he's going to provide fantasy value. So yeah, good for Baker.
Very happy for Baker. We root for him. We like him a lot. Great guy. And I think one of the things when we talked to him at the Super Bowl is he said, we asked, what's money aside, what's most important to you? And he's just like, not only some comfortable, but he's like, somewhere I can win. He's like, that's the most important thing to me is I want to be able to win. And I think once the Buccaneers brought back Mike Evans and sort of showed that commitment, like, hey, we're not going to get rid of all the more expensive pieces and just kind of start over. We're back in this thing. I think that was an indication to him. The most interesting thing to me about Baker, I think fantasy-wise, good for Rashad White, good for Mike Evans, good for Cade Otton is a low end, is a sleeper tight end too. Chris Godwin, all the guys there. Baker himself is kind of a mid-tier QB2 fantasy-wise. But the question to me will be, what's the effect of Dave Canales going to Carolina? Liam Cohen is who was at Kentucky as their OC. He's now the new offensive coordinator. He did spend some time with the Rams when Baker was there for the 4 games. So there's some similarities there, and I would think they'd keep a lot of Canales' playbook, but just not having Dave Canales there, what kind of effect do you think that'll have?
It'd be interesting because that relationship and that trust is so important, and we saw it bring out the best in Baker, but they did go back to a familiar well, like you said, and I think the offense will be fine. I mean, Baker's a guy that you can lean on from a mental perspective to run the same offense. Mike Evans is still there. If there was personnel change, I'd be nervous, but everything's the same. The wide receivers are the same. The offensive line is the same. I mean,
the only reason why I think it is probably going to be worse this year, so one, Canales, but then secondly, the Bucs weren't great on first and second down, and then they were incredible on third down, and that is usually a sign that it's a little bit unsustainable. It's just all these high leverage plays they kept connecting on. So that would be the one thing. I mean, you can counteract that by saying that this is going to be a second year in Tampa, more comfort level, more established rapport with the guys there in the receiver room, but I do think that it might be a little bit unsustainable just how they played in high leverage.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, and they have some, outside of Evans and Godwin, like Trey Palmer, they've got some young guys there that are interesting, and we'll see what they do in the draft and free agency for the rest of the way. But, by the way, the division also got tougher.
Yes.
Kirk Cousins, I mean, now I would have said a week ago the Buccaneers, when they re-signed Baker Mayfield, they're the favorites to repeat as division champs. Now with Cousins in Atlanta, you have to figure the Falcons.
Yeah, I think they're minus 125 to win the division, which is really short for this time for a team that hasn't proven anything yet, but they've got the most talented roster in the division.
The final fantasy relevant one, Russell Wilson, guys. We talked about him taking that minimum deal with the Steelers. Matthew, it feels like if he wouldn't be going there if he wasn't going to be starting over Kenny Pickett. But I think the question is in this offense that just traded Deontay Johnson to the Panthers, what does it look like for Russ?
Yeah, not great. You know what I mean? Like,
Arthur Smith is there,
Arthur Smith, I mean, name the last fantasy relevant quarterback Arthur Smith had. I think Ryan Tannehill might have had one top 10 season under him or something like that. So
With A.J. Brown?
With A.J. Brown and Tannehill. But also, by the way, I believe, I could be wrong about this, but it was something like Tannehill also had like 7 rushing touchdowns that year. Like 5 or 7 rushing touchdowns. Right. So that's the question is, will Arthur Smith use Russ's legs? We saw that start to come back last year, where he's running some more. So if Russ starts running more and we get 300-400 rushing yards out of him and a handful of rushing touchdowns, okay. But my guess is that he's going to be more of this is good news for George Pickens, this is good news for Pat Freiermuth, but that fantasy-wise, Russell Wilson's going to be like a bye-week guy or like a deep 2-quarterback league guy that otherwise you're not really dealing with him.
I think it's a really big deal that Deontay Johnson is no longer on the team. Like, Deontay Johnson was the best. I know that George Pickens gets all the highlights. Deontay Johnson was the most consistent, reliable receiver on that team. Now you're like relying on guys like Calvin Austin, who has potential and is very fast, but Russ, you don't want to have Russ put the Superman cape on, and I don't think the offensive line is good enough to lean on the running game the way that Arthur Smith lent on Derrick Henry back in the day.
Got to believe Pittsburgh is in the market to draft a wide receiver. If not,
100%.
If not another. I mean, they may draft more than one. I mean, this is an incredibly deep wide receiver class, obviously,
yes.
And so and the Steelers, among any franchise in the NFL, have had incredible success in terms of drafting and developing wide receivers over the years. And so, I mean, they got a Stealing Pickens, who there was concerns off the field,
yes.
and they got him straightened out. And
they do that with every player.
Yeah,
they get value.
So, I don't think we know what their receiver room looks like yet. They'll have at least one, if not multiple, wide receivers that they draft this year as well. I think Russ ends up looking like this. I tweeted this out. Tell me if you guys think this is crazy or not, but I think we're going to go back to sort of Seattle Russ in this sense. In Seattle, like, it was a run-first offense. Yep. They ran the ball, and then Russ picked his shots. Like they would try to be really efficient with him. They would run play action quite a bit, and they'd take deep shots to, Tyler Lockett or, Metcalf ultimately. And so I could see that with Pickens and whoever else is coming, that they run a lot with Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris. They just run a ton. Russell Wilson averages 25 pass attempts a game, maybe 22, something like that, like a low volume, pick your spots. Now, Arthur Smith traditionally sort of liked to throw over the middle, and that's not where Russ, I think, is great. But
right.
Still, that's what I sort of think is like he'll be like a lesser version of Seattle Russ, if that makes any sense.
There'll be a lot of run, pass, a lot of play action. I think he'll look a lot like Ryan Tannehill did in that offense. Similar role, just with perhaps more deep shots than the intermediate Tannehill stuff.
Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and RotoWorld.com, and I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched, or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest RotoWorld fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.